We keep talking about risk and risk assessment and safety, and tonight we're going to discuss another way to do just that. Okay, so this task is on page 111 of your task guide. And again, unfortunately, changes have been made since this was written. Primarily, we used to use the Department of Defense form 2977, and that's what it talks about in the guide. So all the pictures in the task guide refer to that form. However, we have introduced our own form recently. And so if you take a look in the, whoops, go back here, go here. If you look in the chat, I have given you the link to form 160. So that's what we will be using this evening and for our format. So it was actually produced in May of 2020. So obviously this was all written a while back before then too. So you can find it now at that address that I've listed on the screen, and I've also put that in the chat. And of course, you can always Google the form and get the link that way as well, or go to gocivalairpatrol.com and search the forms. So you got several ways to get to it. The form looks a bit different, but the essential information it contains remains the same. So before we take a look at it, however, we need to understand why we use it. So the Form 160 helps us through the risk management review, the 5-step process loop that we continuously use to identify potential failure points in UAS flight operations, assign a level of risk to them, create actions or controls that will reduce that risk, and finish up by identifying who's responsible and what they need to do. I'm sure that all of you safety officers out there are familiar with this picture. So at the conclusion of the use of the worksheet, the UAS mission pilot will have created a plan to mitigate risks to an acceptable level in order to get approval from higher authority. You may have already done this in your brain, but this form allows you to have something concrete to refer back to later. So this form actually will complement the ORM matrix, because the ORM matrix identifies overall levels of risk associated with an activity. What we call the DRA, or the Deliberate Risk Assessment Worksheet, takes the initial level of risk as a starting point and identifies mitigation that can further reduce risk to an acceptable level. So it is deliberate because it takes risk analysis one step further to risk mitigation. So you can always refer to it when asked about an emergency planning by your flight release officer. And now, a little bit of honesty on my part. I don't fill one of these out every single time we fly, and I'm not going to ask you to do it. This is what I've done. I've created an initial document that I refer to as a living document. As I've done it, I place more sub-activities as I encounter them. I then reprint and replace it in my ever-popular binder. Everybody knows my Bible binder. So any possible risk that I have encountered or feel I will potentially encounter is listed on that form. We're going to discuss 2 risks this evening. And again, we're going to go into a couple of others as an exercise. I've identified 28 specific risks so far. And as I said, every time I update it, I just put the new date. If anybody needs to see it, I show it to them. There it is. You may not see all 28 risks. You may not need all 28 risks where you are. So it's all going to be up to you, because you are the person that is doing that risk assessment. Does that make sense with everybody?
Yep.
Okay, so now that we know why we're using it, let's take a look at what it is. So the first section of the worksheet contains identifying and contact information and the signature of the preparer. For what I've done, the activity is SUAS flights. The date I use is the date that I last updated it. My name, my rank, my unit, the email, my telephone number, all pretty self-explanatory stuff. And for duty title position, I put PIC, pilot in charge. I'll tell you that there is an error in the form so that you aren't fighting with it for hours though. There is an error when you are trying to fill out the electronic form. Just hand print your phone number. Trust me. Otherwise, you will be fighting with that form forever because it keeps giving you an error. You try putting in the area code and it says it's not the proper format. You do it without the area code, it says it's not the proper format. Try it with dashes, it's not the proper. Just trust me, just print it. Print your number. Just trust me. Okay, so when it filled out, it looks something like this. Okay, so my activity, SUAS flights. The last time I updated it was the 26th of January when I was out in Florida. I recognized a risk, so I put it in. Prepared by, put my name. At the time, I was only a first lieutenant, so I should actually redo that. PIC, whoops. PIC is as my duty with my unit number, my email address. I've handwritten my phone number, and of course, my signature. Okay. So before we start filling out the next section, we need to take a look on page 3 of the form where we find the following chart. We need to use this for every entry that we make. The matrix goes from extremely high to low risk, depending on the frequency and the severity of the potential event. So the frequency or probability of encountering the event is on the top and is labeled A through E. So we have, if it's very frequent, chances are and depending on where we fall here and when we talk about the severity, it's going to be medium to extremely high. If it's unlikely, it's going to fall in the medium to low. Okay. The severity, as I said, is here. And the potential event is found on the right, and it's numbered 1 through 4 in Roman numerals. So we have catastrophic, critical, moderate, negligible. So to look for a frequency of or probability of occasionality when we encounter the risk, and we're going to look at the severity of moderate injury, we would find D at the top and 3 on the side, and we would find that the risk assessment is low. So if we have a frequency of seldom or infrequent occurrence with a moderate risk, we can actually put in low on the worksheet. Okay. So, and there's the low. L equals low risk. So it's important to note that the red warning, note all residual risks identified as H or EH must be approved by CAPF. Okay. Anyone know who that is?
Qatari.
Arnold Balmer.
Nope. Think higher.
Region.
National. Wing Commander.
National Commander. CAPF. So that the only, if it's EH or H, only National has the authority to give us permission. And that's in accordance with Regulation 160-1, which we've already discussed. I'll be honest, it's very rare that we get an EH or H. I think I have 2 mediums and everything else is low in mine. So now we're ready to fill out the next part of the form. So we have 6 columns that we'll be using. We have the sub-activity. So the activity is SUAS flying. We have a sub-activity. We have the possible hazard, the initial risk level, the risk control that we are going to use, how we're going to implement that control, and who will implement it. Settle down. I have a very particular kitty cat tonight. And the residual risk level. So after we've implemented it, what then happens? Did we modify the risk? If it was already low, then obviously we don't modify the risk. If it was medium, there's a potential that we've now brought it to a low. So the page gives us 3 boxes to start, but we know we're more likely to we're going to need more. So National has already thought of that. Additional spaces for items 4 through 9 provided on page 2. Page 2 has room for 10 more entries and can be printed as many times as we need to. It can also be reprinted as well as replenished if you've got an Adobe that you can actually use, you can actually copy it so that now you have several page 2s. I'm lucky that's what I've done. So let's use the example in the task guide, but put it on our new proper form. So the first category of potential hazard identified in this deliberate risk assessment is takeoff and landing mishaps. Okay, within this category, there are 2 hazards that we've identified: operator error and automatic takeoff and systems error. In column 6 is an initial risk as shown based on the risk assessment matrix. In column 7, we have the risk assessment, the risk controls that we would use that could mitigate the hazards. Okay. And then in column 9, or in column 8, the answers the question as to who will be mitigating and how, who will be implementing it, and how will the mitigation follow with the how and the who. Okay, and then the final column shows us. So if we take takeoff and landings and we go to operator error, the initial risk is low. How can we control that risk? By training. Duty day limits. Does anybody not know what that means? Everybody knows what duty day limits are?
Yes.
12 hours.
Exactly. Okay. Pilot pairing, which again goes in line with duty day limits, and the sortie ORM. So how are we going to implement it? We're going to implement procedures, and we're going to have standard operating procedures and standard clarifying procedures, and assess the ORM before the flights, and it's going to be the PIC that's going to do that. When we have the operator takeoff and landing system failure, what are the initial risks? Low. We practice pilot change of command procedures, and we have pre-flight inspections. Then we have the PIC and UAST, who will execute pre-sortie and pre-flight checklists. So within this category, as I said, we've got the 2 hazards identified, and we've taken a look at them. So operator error, automatic takeoff and landing system errors for both low. In column 7, the controls are listed, which could mitigate the hazards. So for operator error, we have determined 4 potential controls. Okay, so that's basically what we're looking at. Sorry, what's going on? There we go. So then in column 8, we implement how and who, and then we have a residual risk level. I know I'm sounding repetitive, but I want to go through it to make sure that everybody does this properly for themselves. This is something that we can discuss. It's not something that I can do for you. Only you can do this, because everybody's going to have different situations that they need to assess for. Okay. Another example of this. Now, obviously, this is really, really out there, but someone who is in Maine dealing with a lot of of sea and seashore type of environments is going to have a very different assessment of risk than someone who's flying in Colorado in the mountains. Make sense? And again, as I said, we do the same for, every time we do it, we do the same thing. So the task guide then continues with several other examples of subtasks. Okay. But you get the idea. We're not going to go into each and every one of them by putting them on the form, mainly because the one thing you'll find is that you're going to come up with your own sub-activities and your hazards that aren't mentioned here. Like I said, make your form a living document, and you'll always be prepared to keep it up to date and show that you are thinking risk management at all times. But for the purposes of the task, someone give me another sub-activity. What other sub-activity could you think of?
Birds.
Birds. So flying in itself, right? So when we take a look at a situation with birds, so the sub-activity is flying. The hazard, birds. The initial risk level. What's the initial risk level of birds with the SUAS? If we go back, let's go back to our. There we go. Let's go back to our risk assessment matrix.
Negligible.
So what would be the frequency of birds?
Moderate.
Moderate to low.
Okay, occasional to no, top moral, guys. We're looking at probability. So
Probably
frequency. So
occasional.
occasional seldom.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's just stick in this area for a second. Occasional seldom. And so if we really had to make a choice, which one would we choose?
If you're near a garbage dump, it would
Occasional.
say occasional. And
Occasional.
if you're not.
Occasional. Okay.
Yes.
So, and then now under the severity, what would do we have? A minor injury, illness, loss, or damage, somewhat degraded unit?
Damage and somewhat degraded unit.
Because again, exactly, if the bird attacks if a bird attacks the bird, if a bird attacks the SUAS, there's no injury. So we're talking damage. Well, if there's damage, then we can maybe even go back to loss or damage. You go to negligible because there is no injury, right? But there is an impact to unit readiness. So I would say that we would have to go to moderate. So if we look at occasional, moderate, then our risk assessment is moderate. Okay. What else so use it now? Let's keep going down that track. So if we look at oops. So that's our hazard. We've got our risk level. What's our risk control with birds?
There's not much you can do other than a scarecrow.
A good spot, a good visual observer.
Yeah. I mean, you can keep your eye open for them, right? That's probably, like you said, that's the best you can do is keep your eyes open for birds and potential attacks by birds. And of course, attacking birds, because we don't want to be running into birds either. Okay. So how will that be implemented?
Observer.
But how would it be implemented? It's part, maybe we need to put that as always part of our briefing, because you guys just gave me another one to put in. But maybe that, in our briefing, one of the things, and let's keep an eye out for birds, guys and gals. And who's going to implement it?
Pilot command.
PIC.
pilot and technician, right? Both, everybody, so basically the entire team.
Everyone.
Okay, so if we're in the sub-activity of flight, what other hazard can we encounter in flight?
Lost control of the aircraft.
Very good. So we've lost control. We've lost control of the aircraft. So let's call which loss of control do we want to use? Lost link or flyaway?
Lost linkage.
Lost link. All right. So our hazard is a lost link. So what's our initial risk level?
Let's go back.
Moderate.
What's our frequency for a lost link?
Seldom. I'd say seldom.
Yeah,
Well,
probably.
I say
I would
Depends where you
I would
location.
agree. I would agree. I have actually had one lost link in the entire time I've been flying. So we've got seldom. And what would be the result of a lost link?
Anything. I'm
Moderate.
23 minutes of panic.
If we let's think about our drone. Let's use the Skydio as an example. If there's a lost link, what's the drone going to do?
I'll come home.
Yeah.
Maybe
we can-
not come home.
Or it may not come home. It may just hover, as the Lieutenant Skursky found out, right? So is there going to be any injury in a lost link situation?
No.
No.
No. So if there's no injury, we are talking minimal to minor injury
Minimum loss.
with loss or death. And again, what's going to happen? We now know that it's not going to drop out of the air. It's just it's going to float down when the battery hits that level where it says, "Hey, I got to land. I can't stay up here all day. I've given you a heart attack for 23 minutes. That's all I'm going to do." So exactly. So we can probably go to negligible, which gives us a low risk category, right? All right. So what's our risk control on a lost link?
Low.
I guess just attempting to reconnect.
Negligible.
Right. Okay. So how do we do that? Our risk control is training. Right. We train for that possibility of occurrence. That's our risk control. Because the only way we're going to be able to deal with it is to learn how to deal with it, and the only way to learn is to train. So our risk control would be training. So how would it be implemented? Through, training procedures. And who would implement that?
Yeah, I see.
The PIC. Exactly. All right. Good. And that's what you've got to do with every single one that you're looking at. Okay. And this is why I say it's a living document, because as you encounter stuff, you're going to come up with more and more things to fill out on this form.
A quick question.
Yep.
With this, so you're going to be doing this even before you take off.
Really, what if you start it now and turn your mind to it now, it's
Right.
just something that you want to take a look at. Every activity that we do has to have a risk assessment.
Well, yeah, but what I'm saying is because every flight or every mission is going to be different, the risk assessment has to be tailored for that particular mission.
No, we're taking, and this is what I was saying, when we look at the risk assessment, we as picks, because 95% of what's going to be on here are going to be pick and technician. So if we are aware of all of those things happening, we're good. We're always good to go. And we're always prepared to move on any of these hazards and on any of these activities. So it's not that we have to prepare this all the time. We always have it so that, and as we encounter something new, we put it in for the next time.
Okay.
And that's what I was saying about making it a living document. So as I said, I print it until I put something else in. This is I'm always going to be using the same one. So why do it? Why kill the trees? It's always going to be the same one until I need it. I update it. And when I update it, then I'll just put a new, I put a new one in with the new date and everything else. Okay. And so with that assessment in mind, we then turn our eye to the ORM form. Make sense? So these are the specific things that we could encounter, and then that's what makes it so easy to go down the ORM in 5-10 minutes and go, yep. And if you start with the ORM form as your subtask, so for example, check weather. Weather is a check, checking weather. What are your hazards? Precipitation is a hazard. What's going to be your assessment on what's your hazard is there? What's the risk level on that? Okay, well, hopefully it's low. Why? We don't fly in wet weather. We are not ducks. So what's the risk assessment after we've implemented our modification? Still low. Perfect.
No. I have a question.
Yep.
If you use the the flight forecast and take a picture of it, can you use that to show for that day what it was with all the information on it?
Yep. Yeah.
Right.
As a matter of fact, if you're using UAV forecast, it's going to give you the hourly forecast anyways. And the nice thing is that it's in real time. So if you check it today, and we all know, again, we all know what the weather is like in Michigan. I can look at a 24-hour weather forecast, and it's going to say sunny all day today and tomorrow, and at midnight we're getting a thunderstorm. It's Michigan, folks.
Yep.
So that's why you want, and it will actually update as that happens, because it's getting its information from the weather stations, and so it's gonna forecast, but it's also gonna change. So, but yeah, again, when because everything is time hacked, right? So when you did the weather, when you entered that weather into the Wimmers, that has a timestamp on it as to what time you checked your weather, right? And then and that's why it says what is it in for the next 24 hours? You put it in, and then in your debrief, what was the weather really like? Sunny and clear, it got overcast, whatever the case may be. Okay, so we've completed all the subcategories and hazards we've encountered, we expect to encounter. So now we need to determine the overall risk level. And it's really easy. We take a look at column 9, and whatever the highest risk level listed is what we put in here. In my case, it's a medium. Like I said, I have one risk that's medium, everything else is low. But because I have one medium, that's my overall residual risk level. And then I make a hard copy of it, put it in my binder, because my binder comes with me everywhere I go. So I've created an all-purpose overall plan and a recommended course of action. I want to maintain currency with SUAS training and regulations and ensure that briefings include potential hazards. Continue thinking of ways to decrease risk and enhance safety. So if you have this overarching form, where you're going to tailor it is in your briefing. You're not going to talk about foxholes and rabbit holes if you're on a beach, right? Although foxholes and rabbit holes are potential hazards out in the woods, because what happens if you put, if you encounter a foxhole, your foot goes in it, you're liable to sprain your ankle, right? So you've got a little bit of a risk. How often does it occur? Very rarely, but it's still a risk. That's my problem. I'm one of these guys that throws everything on the table and then lets people sort through it. So that's why I have this form that's 4 pages long. Not because I'm a pessimist. I'm just, all right, what else can go wrong? I spent too many years in scouting where you plan for the worst, you hope for the best, and plan for the worst. So since I've always got a hard copy with me, I can easily pull it out if anybody at Incident Command wants to approve it and fill out their portion, because sometimes they do need this. So I've always got that copy where oh, we're not going to approve this. Oh, you're not? Why? What did I miss? The way I've done it, I can't see why nobody at Incident Command would not approve it. And then they would sign, and then they can keep that hard copy, and I'll just print off a new one for myself and put it back in my binder. And really, that's what this is all about. It's an exercise that if you're really bored, and that was the other problem is I did this during COVID, so I was really bored. You got nothing better to do. You're sitting at, oh, there's another thing, and you start writing it down, and then you go to your computer and you type it up, and you keep going, and all of us. I think a couple of times that poor Lieutenant Board jumped out of her skin because I went, oh, another one. What? Okay, so all of this to say, listen, what we want to do is you want to have a copy of this form on you, and if you can think more in generalities of SUAS flight, and then you just have to pick and choose the ones that are definitely going to be present on the specific mission that you're flying. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. So, any questions on that?
No.
Oh, yes. I was only off by 4 minutes on that one. That's good. Okay, so now let me. Okay.